Young, and the Restless spoilers full Wednesday update episodes the 4th of February 2026. Nikki had agreed to many of Victor's plans over the years, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with weary resignation, but this time felt different in a way she could not immediately articulate. When she first allowed Victor to involve Lily and Kane's children as leverage, she convinced herself it was controlled, contained. Another calculated maneuver in a long line of battles that Victor always claimed to understand better than anyone else. Yet as the details of the plan unfolded, unease crept in quietly, like a draft slipping through cracks she had long pretended did not exist. The idea that Lily's safety depended not on trust, but on Victor's sense of order, gnawed at her conscience in a way she had not anticipated. She told herself that Victor had done this before, that he always walked the edge and never crossed it, but doubt lingered nonetheless, stubborn and unresolved. When Nikki learned the full scope of Victor's strategy, that he intended to convince Kane that Lily, Maddie, and Charlie were being held under his control, and that their safety hinged on Kane returning assets Victor had taken legally but provocatively, she reacted not with fear, but with admiration tinged by disbelief. She called Victor the smartest man in the world, half in awe, half in self-reproach. The words came too easily, as though she were trying to reassure herself that brilliance could still excuse cruelty. In that moment, she realized something unsettling. She was no longer standing apart from Victor as his moral compass, no longer the quiet voice urging restraint. She had stepped inside the logic of his world, where outcomes justified means, and power was indistinguishable from righteousness. Victor, emboldened by Nikki's reluctant approval, dismissed her concerns with the confidence of a man who believed chaos bent naturally to his will. He insisted that everything was under control, that Lily and the twins were never truly in danger, that fear was merely a tool, one Kane would choke on. Just like every other man foolish enough to challenge him. Victor spoke of inevitability, of rules that governed human nature, rules he claimed to understand better than anyone. Kane would panic. Kane would overreach, Kane would lose. That was the pattern, and Victor trusted patterns more than people. To him, Lily was not Neil's daughter or Nikki's responsibility, but a strategic piece placed precisely where it would provoke maximum response. With arrogant certainty, Victor approached Kane, his posture relaxed, his voice sharpened with mockery. He taunted him openly, prodded his desperation, using Lily's name not with concern but with calculated precision. The cruelty was subtle, wrapped in confidence rather than threat, but no less potent for it. Victor felt powerful in that moment, validated not only by the fear he saw in Kane's eyes but by the belief that he was once again proving the fundamental truth he lived by: no one outplayed him. No one escaped his reach, and no emotional bond was stronger than his command of circumstance. The fact that Lily was Neil's daughter only added a layer of bitter irony that Victor seemed to savor rather than respect. Watching this unfold, Nikki felt something inside her shift, not dramatically, not explosively, but with a chilling clarity that startled her. For the first time, a thought surfaced that had never truly taken shape before. What if Victor was capable of crossing a line he had always sworn he never would? What if his certainty was not control, but blindness disguised as confidence? She had seen Victor ruthless before, but always with an internal boundary he claimed existed, an unspoken promise that innocent lives were never truly at stake. Now, that promise felt fragile, perhaps even imaginary. The realization that Victor might genuinely believe harm was acceptable if it preserved his dominance unsettled her deeply. Nikki's fear was not just for Lily and the children, but for Victor himself, for the man he was becoming when no one stopped him, not even her. She wondered when admiration had turned into complicity, when loyalty had dulled her instinct to intervene. This was not a familiar dilemma where she could drink away the discomfort or rationalize it as temporary. This was different. This was the creeping awareness that silence itself was an action, and that by allowing this plan to proceed, she had helped construct a scenario that could spiral beyond anyone's control. Victor had always insisted he knew exactly how far to go, but Nikki was no longer certain he recognized where that line truly was. Standing in the aftermath of that realization, Nikki felt trapped between the man she loved and the consequences she feared. If she confronted Victor, she risked becoming irrelevant, dismissed as emotional, and necessary. If she did nothing, she risked witnessing something irreversible, a harm that could not be undone with money, power, or apologies. The question that haunted her was not whether Victor would win, but what winning would cost this time, and whether she could live with herself if she allowed it to happen. For the first time in years, Nikki was not sure which terrified her more, betraying Victor or protecting him. And as that doubt took hold, one undeniable truth surfaced with it: this plan was no longer safely contained. The pieces were moving too quickly, the emotions too volatile, and Victor's confidence too absolute. Nikki sensed, with growing dread, that what had begun as a calculated lesson for Cain was veering toward something darker, something that even Victor might not be able to control once unleashed. The question was no longer whether things could go wrong, but whether she would act before they did. While Victor and Cain remained locked in their silent war of glares and egos, each convinced that dominance could be asserted through intimidation alone. An entirely different victory was unfolding elsewhere, one that neither man bothered to notice. Diane and Jack watched the chaos with quiet satisfaction, acutely aware that when titans fixate on destroying one another, they often leave their flanks exposed. For once, the mustache and the upstart were so consumed by their personal vendetta that neither spared a thought for Jabbit, and that negligence proved to be their greatest weakness. Jack's instinctive decision to shut down the company's online systems, a move made in seconds rather than meetings, neutralized Cain's ultra-secret artificial intelligence program before it could infiltrate and dismantle the Abbott legacy from within. The threat had been real, insidious, and devastating in potential, designed not merely to destabilize Jabbit but to erase the very foundation John Abbott had built. By pulling the plug at precisely the right moment, Jack preserved more than a corporation. He safeguarded a family identity. For now, they were safe, temporarily insulated from destruction that Jack understood better than anyone that safe in Genoa City was always a provisional state. That provisional calm did little to settle the unease spreading through the rest of the city. Billy, already carrying the familiar weight of self-doubt and unresolved regret, was blindsided by news of Jill's declining health, delivered not by family, but by Sally. The distance embedded in that fact alone spoke volumes. When Lauren followed with further updates, confirming not only Jill's fragility but her deliberate refusal to speak with her son, the message became impossible to ignore. Silence, in this case, was not accidental, it was intentional. Billy felt the sting of that rejection more sharply than any confrontation could have inflicted. It forced him to confront a truth he had long avoided, that the chaos he carried into every room might finally have exhausted the people who once fought hardest to save him from himself. For perhaps the first time, Billy began to wonder whether reinvention was no longer optional, but necessary, whether continuing down the same path would only leave him more isolated, more unheard, more alone. Elsewhere, quieter conversations carried consequences just as profound. Sienna Bacall found herself opening up to Claire Newman, a moment that felt both intimate and dangerous. Sienna's confession was not dramatic, but it was heavy with implication. She admitted uncertainty about her future, about her direction, about whether she truly wanted Noah Newman to follow her to Los Angeles. The hesitation was not rooted in a lack of feeling, but in fear of repeating patterns she was not sure she had fully escaped. Claire listened carefully, outwardly sympathetic, inwardly alert. Experience had taught her that uncertainty often concealed deeper truths, and she gently pressed for more, steering the conversation toward Audra Charles. Claire's curiosity was not casual, it was strategic. Audra was not merely a rival, but a lingering threat, one whose influence seemed to extend further than anyone could clearly trace. Whether Sienna held new insight or not remained uncertain, but the attempt itself signaled that Claire was far from passive in this unfolding power struggle. At the same time, Abby Newman and Devin Winters made a decision born of quiet desperation rather than panic. They reached out to Detective Burrow, acknowledging that the answers they needed lay beyond corporate maneuvering and emotional appeals. Their request was not driven by suspicion alone, but by a growing awareness that too many threads were converging in dangerous ways. Secrets had a way of overlapping in Genoa City, and Abby and Devin understood that ignoring those intersections could be catastrophic. Involving Burrow was an admission that the stakes had escalated beyond personal disputes and into territory where truth required excavation, not negotiation. Across town, Sharon Newman and Tessa Porter found solace in shared grief, their connection forged not through explanation but through understanding. Words were unnecessary when the pain was familiar, when loss felt like a constant companion rather than a temporary wound. Their quiet solidarity served as a reminder that while power plays and corporate warfare dominated the headlines, the emotional toll was being absorbed elsewhere, in rooms without witnesses, in conversations that would never be weaponized. In those moments, grief was not weakness but endurance, a refusal to let suffering isolate them completely. Taken together, these parallel stories revealed a city on the brink not of explosion, but of reckoning. While Victor reveled in his perceived control and Kane simmered in humiliation and fury, the true shifts were happening beyond their line of sight. Alliances were recalibrating. Boundaries were being reconsidered. Decisions once deferred were now unavoidable. The danger was no longer confined to any single plan or personality. It was diffused, embedded in the choices people were making when they believed no one powerful was watching. And as Genoa City continued to turn, indifferent to anyone's sense of inevitability, one truth became increasingly clear: the greatest threats rarely announced themselves. They emerged quietly, while everyone else was distracted, convinced the real battle was happening somewhere else. At the Chancellor estate, desperation finally outweighed pride. Abby and Devon no longer debated whether involving law enforcement would complicate matters. The situation had already surpassed anything they could manage alone. Sitting across from Detective Burrow, they laid out the truth with painful clarity. Mariah Copeland had fled with their son, Dominic Winters. And every hour that passed without answers felt like a tightening vice around their chests. There was no anger in their voices now, only fear sharpened by guilt. Abby questioned herself relentlessly, wondering how she had missed the signs, how love and trust could coexist with such a devastating blind spot. Devon, quieter but no less shaken, struggled with the idea that someone they loved had become someone capable of this. Burrow listened carefully, his expression revealing nothing, but he understood the complexity immediately. This was not a simple abduction fueled by malice alone. It was a disappearance driven by instability, emotional fracture, and unresolved trauma. Whether he could find Dominic depended not only on evidence, but on understanding Mariah's state of mind before it spiraled beyond recognition. Elsewhere, Sharon faced a different kind of helplessness. Sitting with Tessa, she was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that the daughter she had fought so hard to protect was no longer the person she remembered. Tessa did not speak lightly when she admitted her fear. Her words carried the weight of someone who had seen the change up close and could no longer deny it. Mariah's behavior was no longer erratic in ways that could be explained away or softened with excuses. It was deliberate, secretive, and driven by a conviction that frightened Tessa deeply. Sharon felt the ground shift beneath her as she listened. This was not simply about making bad choices or falling back into old patterns. This was transformation, and not the kind born of growth. The realization that they were no longer dealing with the Mariah they knew shattered Sharon's remaining illusions and left her facing a question no parent ever wants to consider. How do you save someone who no longer believes they need saving? As these emotional crises unfolded, practical realities continued to intrude with cruel timing. Lauren Fenmore delivered another update to Billy Abbott, confirming that Jill's health remained fragile and that her distance was not accidental. The message was clear without being spoken aloud. Jill was choosing silence, perhaps as self-preservation, perhaps as a final boundary. Billy absorbed the information with a hollow nod, the familiar ache of inadequacy resurfacing stronger than ever. For years, he had dismissed warnings, ignored consequences, and trusted that love would always wait for him to catch up. Now, faced with the possibility that time itself was no longer on his side, Billy felt the uncomfortable pull toward introspection. Change, he realized, could no longer be an abstract concept deferred to some undefined future. It was either imminent or impossible. In stark contrast, Jack Abbott and Diane Jenkins allowed themselves a moment of celebration. Their victory was not loud, nor reckless, but quietly triumphant. With Victor and Kane consumed by their escalating power struggle, Abbott had slipped beneath the radar, spared from immediate attack. Jack understood that survival in Genoa City rarely came from brute force, it came from timing and restraint. Diane, ever perceptive, recognized the irony of it all. To men obsessed with dominance had blinded themselves to a threat that nearly cost the Abbotts everything. The celebration, though genuine, was tempered by awareness. This was not the end of danger, only a pause. And in Genoa City, pauses were often the most dangerous moments of all. Meanwhile, Nicky Newman's unease deepened into something closer to dread. Her concern for Lily Winters was no longer theoretical or distant. It had become personal and urgent. Watching Victor grow increasingly assured of his control unsettled Nicky in ways she had never experienced before. The man she loved had always walked the line between protector and tyrant, but now that line seemed perilously thin. The idea that Lily's safety existed only within the boundaries of Victor's confidence haunted Nicky. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a scenario where Victor's plan did not unfold as intended, where fear provoked not submission but chaos. The possibility that Victor could be wrong, dangerously wrong, was no longer unthinkable. That possibility loomed largest over Kane, whose anxiety intensified with every unanswered call and every hour without word from Lily or the children. His instincts led him to one conclusion, and one alone: Victor Newman was responsible. The pattern was too familiar, the timing too precise. Kane's certainty hardened into obsession, and when he crossed paths with Adam Newman at Chancellor Park Cafe, restraint evaporated. Kane saw Adam not as an ally or an enemy, but as a potential gateway to the truth. His accusation was raw, fueled by fear rather than strategy. He demanded answers, demanded acknowledgement, demanded proof that this was all part of some twisted game Victor was playing behind the scenes. What Kane did not fully grasp was that Victor's greatest weapon was not control, but misdirection. By allowing Kane to believe that his family was being held as leverage, Victor had successfully narrowed his focus, steering his fury toward predictable targets. Whether Kane was walking directly into Victor's trap or whether the plan was already beginning to unravel remained uncertain. The danger lay in the unpredictability of human response. Fear did not always produce obedience. Sometimes, it produced defiance powerful enough to collapse even the most meticulously designed schemes. As these threads tightened around Genoa City, the illusion of control began to fracture. Plans overlapped, emotions escalated, the lines between manipulation and consequence blurred. Victor believed he was orchestrating a lesson, but lessons had a way of escaping their intended scope. Kane believed he was uncovering a conspiracy, unaware that his reactions were being measured just as carefully as his actions. And everyone else, Abby, Devon, Sharon, Nicky, stood at the edge of outcomes they could sense but not yet see. The question was no longer who would win, but who would pay the highest price once the truth finally emerged.